Hi, Trainmaster04 here, and in this video I'll be reviewing the brand new VisionLine Union Pacific Big Boy number 4000, the world's largest steam locomotive. So sit back, relax, and let's get on with the show.
Albuquerque engine 3001. Starter up, stand by to pull. Over. Copy that, Albuquerque. We'll start her up. 3001 out.
To start this video off, let's go over the history on the real Union Pacific 4000. Union Pacific number 4000 is classified as a simple articulated type steam locomotive with an enormous wheel arrangement of 4884 underneath the boiler. This locomotive was originally built by the American Locomotive Company, or ALCO, in 1941 and was designated as a 4884-1 type locomotive. However, crews later on shortened that said designation and started calling these locomotives 4000s since the number started with engine number 4000. Number 4000 was accompanied by a total of 25 siblings and was also a part of the first of two batches the Union Pacific would order from ALCO. Batch number 4884-1, built in 1941, ranged from engine number 4000 herself all the way up to number 4019. Later, as World War II started, the Union Pacific Railroads found themselves in need of yet even more brute power and went back to ALCO in 1944 and ordered 5 more big boys, numbering from 4020 to 4024. Going back to the dark decade called the 1930s, most American railroads found themselves towards the end of the 1930s an uprise of freight traffic as the American economy found itself stabilizing once again. As a result, in 1936, demands for heavier, fast freight across the Wyoming Range became too much for the Union Pacific Railroad and decided to produce a new type of steam locomotive. Classified as a 4664 simple articulated type steam locomotive, the Challengers became the, at the time, best answer to solve their current needs. These locomotives, like the big boys, were very well powered, balanced, and also were able to pull their heavy freight trains with great speeds. However, this need for yet even more power came back, and 5 years later, in 1941, the 4000s made their debut. UP number 4000 and the rest of her siblings were used and were somewhat of replacements for the Challenger type locomotives, being used all the way through World War II, becoming the main backbone for freight traffic along the Union Pacific rails between Cheyenne, Wyoming and Ogden, Utah. The locomotives were even used all the way through the 1950s when dieselization, first being introduced by EM in 1939 with their FT units, and also being used alongside with experimental units such as the gas turbine. However, even the 4000s, the world's largest and possibly the most powerful type locomotives of the era and still to this very day, soon found themselves being retired off in 1961 through 1962. However, that does not mean these locomotives no longer exist. Out of the 25 big boys produced by the American Locomotive Company, there are thankfully 8 still in existence. The first 6 are a part of the first class of locomotives produced by ALCO, and then the last one being produced in the second batch. The first 3 engines are number 4000, 4005, 4006, 4004 being located in Cheyenne, Wyoming, 4005 at the Forney Transportation Museum in Denver, Colorado, 4006 being located at the National Museum of Transportation in St. Louis, Missouri. Skipping ahead a little bit, engines number 4012, 4017, and 4018 located at Steamtown National Historic Site, Scranton, Pennsylvania, the National Railroad Museum in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the Museum of the American Railroad in Frisco, Texas. And then finally, engine number 4023, located in Omaha, Nebraska. Out of all of these locomotives, they are all on static display, either under covered buildings or, unfortunately, out in the elements. There is one locomotive, however, that sets the bar when it comes to steam preservation, and that being a locomotive actually being restored to operating status. And that locomotive, as you have probably guessed, is engine number 4014. Built by Alco in November of 1941, she was a part of the 4000 class first batch, as number 4000 came from herself, and was originally located on stacked display out in the elements at the Rail Giants Museum in Southern California. However, in 2014, the Union Pacific Railroad went across the United States, inspecting all 8 surviving big boys to restore one of them and add them to their historic steam fleet. As a result, number 4014 found herself in better condition than compared to her 7 other surviving siblings, and was restored with millions of dollars and was first debuted in May of 2019. She was first run under her own power with Union Pacific Northern number 844 and ran under her own steam between Cheyenne, Wyoming and Ogden, Utah to celebrate the Transcontinental Railroad's 150th anniversary. Since then, Big Boy number 4014 has held up the heritage of the 4000 class locomotives by running across the United States, showing American citizens of today what it was like back in 1941. Now that you have a better understanding of the real 4000 class locomotives, let's go over the stats and facts of the model you see right in front of you. This model was recently released in Lionel's 2023 Volume 1 catalog and soon starts shipping out to dealers around August of the same year. This model is actually not one of the models offered in Lionel's 2023 catalog, but instead is actually a custom run from Mr. Muffin's trains. What makes this locomotive different than the other 4000 that Lionel has offered is the fact that Mr. Muffins decided to add the Big Boy script on the smokebox front, which in my opinion is a lot more prototypical than the 4000 that Lionel offered in their catalog. This model, for its measurements, has a combined length of 32 inches, and as a result, this model has a minimum curve radius of 0.72. Under the hood, this model is powered by one large flywheel motor and is also equipped with 4 fan-driven smoke units, the first 2 in which are located up front in the smoke box. One is used for the main smokestack, and then the second one is used for the smoking whistle. Now, if you remember, going back to 2014 when the original VisionLine Big Boys came out, Lionel offered that locomotive with, yet again, 4 fan-driven smoke units, but more importantly, there were 2 located for the main smokestack. At the time, Lionel was trying to reproduce the independent chuffs of both the separate cylinders on the locomotive, producing, when the locomotive is in slow operations, single jettisons of steam coming out of the main smokestacks. However, this ended up being not prototypical to the real Big Boys, and as a result, Lionel has opted to go back to a single fan-driven smoke unit for the main smokestack. Going back to the other 2 fan-driven smoke units, going down to the middle of the boiler at the safety valves, one of the smoke units is located right here for the safety valve release. Instead of using the second fan for the smokestack, Lionel opted to update these locomotives with the safety valve feature, first seen on the VisionLine Niagaras and making a return on the massive Big Boys. And finally, a former feature is also making a return on this version of the VisionLine Big Boys, and that is the blowdown effect towards the cab. For electronics, this locomotive is equipped with Lionel's Legacy Rail Sounds features, which allow for you, the operator, to experience realistic sounds such as the chuffing, crew talk sounds, and many other vocal features that we'll cover later on in this video. But also, these features have a VisionLine flair in that the crew talk sounds are road number specific. For command control, this locomotive is equipped with Lionel's Legacy Command System, which means you have 5 different options to operate this locomotive. The first is using Lionel's future update to the Legacy Command System, the Cab 3. Second and current command system is using Lionel's Cab 2 Legacy Command System, which will allow you to access all of the electronic features this model has to offer. The third is using Bluetooth, which will allow you to gain most of the basic features that this model has to offer, but not as much as the Legacy. Third is using Lionel's original command system, the TeamCC Cab 1 command system. And then the fifth is using Lionel's conventional mode by just simply putting this locomotive on a loop track and powering it up with a transformer. With the model stats and facts covered, let's go ahead and take a deeper dive and go over all the details. Starting at the front of the locomotive, at the bottom, here is the main cast steel pilot for the locomotive, and probably one of the more iconic images for the big boys themselves, with this low-hanging jaw that just exudes power and strength. For details, however, it is nicely painted in the flat black that gives it that freight-working locomotive feel, and is also nicely detailed with two separately applied steps, some separately applied flagpole stanchions, brake hose detailing with separately applied paintwork on the end, a separately applied coupler cup bar with a separately applied coupler cup bar piece that would fit a chain through a scale coupler. On top, here is a separately applied air compressor shield with molded in vents, doorways, a separately applied grab iron, and more importantly, a separately applied shield. And then finally on the pilot itself, this locomotive is equipped with a dummy scale coupler, which can be swung out like so, or can be discreetly hidden by closing up this little hatch piece on the pilot. This coupler, do note, can be swapped out for a dummy O-gauge coupler if you so do wish to double head one of these locomotives. However, there are a number of steps that require taking apart the pilot assembly altogether in order to take off the said scale coupler and put in the dummy O-gauge coupler. And as a result, you would not be able to discreetly hide the dummy O-gauge coupler, nor would you be able to quickly swap in and out the scale coupler for the dummy O-gauge coupler. As a result, I would suggest not going and doing said procedure unless you really want to go and double head one of these locomotives. Looking on up from the pilot, and now more specifically at the smokebox front, here you can see there are yet even more details on the upper platform. There are two separately applied grab irons on either side of the safety treaded platform, another grab iron in the center going around the headlamp, which does come on when the locomotive is in operation. And then on the smokebox front itself, it too is nicely detailed with the correct graphite gray paint scheme, a little lighter than I would have liked it to have been, but much better than the plain white Lionel has been prone to do on most of their steam locomotives. For details, there are separately applied and molded in details to be shown, such as a separately applied grab iron going along the length of the smokebox door, molded in rivets, hinges, and then two separately applied marker lights which come on when the locomotive is in operation and can be changed color from green to white. Check out my YouTube how-to short video on that. And then there's also two separately applied number boards which are backlit, and in the center a separately applied bell, which in this case is actually brass. Coming back to the smokebox door itself, as you can see, there is a closer up shot of that famous big boy script, and then if I go and open the smokebox door itself, you'll notice the locomotive has a little bit of a hard time fully opening the locomotive due to the way it sits, but if I lift it up, inside it reveals some nice details on the inside. In this case, taking true to the original VisionLine big boys, Lionel has yet again detailed the interior of the smokebox by producing a separately applied smoke and cinder vent, protecting the crews from any form of debris when the locomotive is in operation. But one little side detail that I do want to note about this is the fact that the screen itself is not painted black. Instead, it is still bare metal silver, something that I'm not quite pleased when it comes to quality control. Moving over to the engineer side of the locomotive, and starting off, here is the first set of powered driving wheels on the locomotive. In this case, the details are pretty standard for what you would expect on a steam locomotive, as there is the Walschaerts valve gear, mechanical lubricators, a single bar crosshead, and various other accessory linkage going off the side rods. For details, it is very nice to see that the continuation of the mechanical lubricator is on this version of the VisionLine Big Boys, something that I'm quite pleased with on the original VisionLine Big Boys. It is such a nice little detail to see when the locomotive's in operation. Side rods themselves have been chemically darkened to give this locomotive a more rugged appearance instead of having polished side rods. For other details, the cylinders are nicely detailed with various molded in rivets and pipework coming off of it. And speaking of pipes, probably one of the biggest details that is evidently noticed is the massive steam pipes coming underneath the boiler. Now these pipes do have an important purpose for this model as well as on the real prototype. For the model in this case, this hinge point from here to here actually do allow the locomotive to pivot like the real thing. As a result, when you are maintaining this model, I would suggest giving a daub of oil located here, inside, and then right here on top of the cylinders. This will allow the cylinders and also these joints to be lubricated a little bit easier and give the locomotive free movement when it goes around sharp curves. Moving up top, the locomotive is yet again nicely detailed with a separately applied air compressor cooling vents along the side of the handrails that I showed you earlier from the front, and then the running board itself. The running board is nicely detailed with safety tread on top, a separately applied handrail that goes along the length of the boiler, and underneath has multiple LED running board lights which come on when the locomotive is on a standstill or is under 24 miles per hour. Looking at the boiler itself, it too is nicely detailed with molded in rivet details, separately applied pipework, a separately applied throttle linkage going into the superheater, and then more importantly, 3 builder's plates which are legible under a microscope. Continuing down the side of the boiler, here we have the second set of 8 driving wheels, and this area is a little bit more cramped compared to the front set of drivers. In this case, yet again, they are nicely detailed with the correct Walschaerts valve gear, mechanical lubricators with operating linkage, a separately applied power reverser and then associated linkage going down to the Walschaerts valve gear, a separately applied dynamo generator right next to one of the 2 iconic red wheels used to help dump any of the ash from the ash pan. Underneath the running board, there is yet even more pipework coming off of the middle set of cylinders, a separately applied air compressor tank with legible writing on the side, the continuation of the safety treaded running boards, various more pipework that is also separately applied, and then on the boiler itself, the continuation of the throttle linkage, handrail, and also more molded in details in the form of boiler bands, rivets, and also access hatches behind the boiler jacket. Finally, taking a look at the cab and firebox area of the locomotive, there is still yet a ton of details to be shown. Starting at the bottom, here we have the separately applied 4-wheel truck, which has oodles of separately applied details, such as separately applied brake hose detailing, compressor tanks, and then also roller bearing caps. Up atop here is the firebox itself, which was considered one of the largest firebox ever produced on a steam locomotive, so big you could technically park a single car inside of the firebox. For details, it is surrounded by yet even more separately applied pipework for steam injectors, accessories, and even that dynamo generator. It is nicely painted in a wonderful firebox gray and is also detailed with molded in rivet details. This locomotive, since it is a coal burner, is equipped with the variable ash pan glow effect, so when the locomotive's in motion, you will see a red glow coming from the firebox. Right here underneath the running board, and which is equipped with some more molded in pipework and also a separately applied step leading up to the said running board, is a nice little nozzle. As stated earlier, this locomotive is equipped with the blowdown smoke effect, and this is the exit hole for the said smoke down effect. In this case, the locomotive would have been blowing down steam to release any kind of sediments and scaling within the boiler. Coming up to the cab itself, it too is nicely detailed with the number 4000 nicely printed in the UP lettering and beautiful white, and underneath is the designated classification that the Union Pacific Railroad used to classify their locomotives. For other details, there's a nice little window up front with glazing for the windows, and then on the side are the cab windows themselves. In this case, it is a unique type of window in that it actually telescopes a little different. The first window is glazed but is stationary, and the second two windows, however, are what are important. In this case, they can actually telescope on themselves in different patterns. They can either open up all the way as such, or they can be separated individually as shown earlier. For other details, there's also a separately applied grab bar above the cab window and a molded-in window seal. Looking inside the cab of the locomotive, as you can see, this model has one of the most detailed and massive cabs that Lionel has ever produced. For a VisionLine model, this is no surprise considering that VisionLine is meant to be new technology but with impeccable detail, something that would even rival brass models. And that is no joke when it comes to the VisionLine big boys. Inside the cab, there are 4 seats in total, a jump seat behind the fireman and one behind the engineer. Speaking of fireman engineer, this locomotive is also equipped with 2 hand-painted crew figures, one on either side of the cab, and they are positioned right behind a wonderfully detailed back head. For details on the back head, it is nicely detailed with molded-in valves and gauges, which have been hand-painted, something you do not see on regular production models. And then in the center, there is the butterfly doors leading into the massive firebox. In this case, the butterfly doors do have drilled holes in them, allowing for the massive firebox glow to come out when the locomotive is in operation. To view all these details, as you can see, when the locomotive is at a standstill, the cab is nicely illuminated with an LED light. Coming on outside of the cab, there are yet even more details to be shown. In this case, there are 2 separately applied grab irons on either side of the cab, 2 separately applied metal curtains attached to a curtain rod going over the entrance of the cab itself, and then in the middle, there is a separately applied tender deck plate, which is still a nice touch to have on such a highly detailed model. And then finally, coming down to the bottom of the locomotive itself is the infrared drawbar. Now, typically, I would go and explain that this infrared drawbar just simply connects the locomotive to the tender and sends information between the locomotive and tender. However, this locomotive, a little different than compared to the original VisionLine big boys, is actually equipped with the force coupler feature. I originally did not know that this locomotive had the said force coupler feature, as I did not hear about it until I actually got my hands on this model. When I was running it around on my layout, I noticed the locomotive automatically increased its drag and produced yet even more smoke when a train was put behind it. That immediately told me that this locomotive is equipped with the force coupler. In this case, all it is just a little sensor on this drawbar that senses when weight is put behind it. As a result, the locomotive responds by working harder and producing yet even more smoke. So instead of having to manually force your locomotive to work harder, it does it for you automatically. On top of the locomotive, starting at the smoke box and working down to the cab, here on the smoke box itself, it is nicely detailed with the separately applied conduit pipes, steam pipes, and more importantly, the massive dual stacks. As stated earlier, this locomotive is equipped with 2 fan-driven smoke units located up front here, one for the main smokestack and then one for the smoking whistle just behind the stacks. In order to fill first the smoke unit for the main smokestacks, you simply just pour your smoke fluid directly down either one of these 2 stacks. Used to in the past with the original VisionLine big boys, you would have to pour smoke fluid directly down each individual stack due to the smoke units being separate from each other. Now with this case, you do not have to do that since instead it is just one single unit. For the smoking whistle, however, in this case I would suggest simply picking up the whistle itself, detaching that little lanyard, removing the whistle piece itself, place a funnel into the smoking whistle hole, and then pour your smoke fluid directly down the hole. This will allow the smoke fluid to gain a direct access into the smoke unit itself and not be interfered by the smoking whistle piece itself. Moving on down, around the whistle there are some nice little details such as a molded-in superheater patch separately applied pipework with hand-painted valves, and then right next to it, one of the two enormous sand domes on this model. In this case, this sand dome is also nicely detailed with molded in sand dome hatches and also two separately applied grab irons on either side. Coming towards the middle of the locomotive, here is the steam dome, which is also a molded in piece to the locomotive's boiler, and then right next to it, a set of 5 separately applied brass milled safety valves. And as stated earlier, this locomotive is equipped with the safety valve smoke effect, and so when the locomotive is stationary or moving at a slow speed, every once in a while smoke will come out of these hidden holes underneath the safety valves periodically for a few seconds. Now, how to fill this smoke unit is coming up right now. Continuing past the solid brass safety valves, right next to it is a nice little separately applied hand-painted valve. In this case, this is what's called the monkey tail in the railroading world, and this is a nice little valve that is actually quite important in the startup sequence for locomotives. In this case, this valve will be opened when the locomotive is starting to be fired up, and it allows any air that has been entrapped inside the boiler to slowly escape as steam pressure builds. Something very important for successful operations. More importantly, however, is the second sand dome on this model, and as you can see, it is practically identical to the first one that we saw earlier, with the 4 molded in hatches on top and also the 2 separately applied grab irons on the opposite side. The one detail that you may not have noticed at first glance is that the lid itself is actually a little cockeyed, and that is because this hatch actually hides all of the necessary operating switches to run this locomotive properly, and also the 2 fill holes for the 2 smoke units located within the boiler. In this case, the first smoke fluid fill hole is actually for the safety valves. In order to fill this smoke unit, I would just simply suggest to take a small little funnel, put it directly down into this hole, and then pour your smoke fluid into the funnel. This will allow the smoke fluid to have an ease of operation of going into the smoke unit, and also will prevent any smoke fluid going onto the electronics inside the locomotive and possibly damaging them. The second fill hole right here is for the steam blowdown effect, and in this case I would go and use the same operation as stated earlier. Now, for the plate itself, it is nicely designed to have 2 magnets to hold it down, but more importantly, have 2 rubber gaskets. In this case, these 2 rubber gaskets align very nicely with those 2 fill holes and make a very nice seal for the smoke units to operate properly. Continuing down the boiler, we have yet even more molded in boiler bands, rivet details, and then we get to the steam turret, which has nice molded in details of service hatches, and also some protruding steam equipment located inside. And then finally, the cab itself is also nicely detailed with molded in rivet detailing, and also a separately applied roof vent, which as you can see can open and close. Finally, taking a quick look at the fireman's side of the locomotive, and as you can see, it is practically identical as compared to the engineer's side, but there are a few minute differences, such as the addition of another feed water heater system located underneath the running board, various pipework going along on this side of the smoke box, different builder's plates which are also legible as compared to the others on the engineer side, separately applied overflow pipe for the water injector, and then no steam dynamo located on the side of the firebox. With the locomotive taken care of, let's now go over to the tender. Starting at the front, here you can see it is nicely detailed with various separately applied pipework, ladder stanchions on the front and both sides, 2 separately applied grab irons for crews to grab onto, and then on the face of it itself, there is a multitude of molded in details, such as a molded in coal auger, which the real big boys had since the fireboxes were so large, a fireman could not hand fire these locomotives to even produce enough steam for it to blow its whistle. So as a result, these locomotives were given automatic stokers. In the center, something that Lionel has continued to keep with these die-cast metal tenders is the fact that these 4 coal hatch doors are actually sprung loaded. If I gently hold the tender back and show you, as you can see, the doors can open, the 2 bottom ones being independent from each other, but if I push the upper ones, it opens the doors as a larger fixture. And then finally, coming back down to the bottom of the tender, here we have the tender end for the infrared sensor. Now, this tender drawbar is actually a little different than compared to the original VisionLine Big Boy, and that is because Lionel is equipped it with the kinematic coupler feature. The kinematic coupler feature is actually quite unique and is popular on Lionel's 21-inch passenger cars, and the premises is that when the locomotive is going on a straightaway, the locomotive and tender gap are pulled together. But when the locomotive goes around a corner, the drawbar itself actually moves and pulls out from side to side, giving the locomotive and tender gap a larger distance and allowing both of them to negotiate the tighter curves just a little bit easier. Something that I quite like that Lionel added to this locomotive. Moving over to the engineer side of the tender, and as you can see, this thing is quite a beast, which is quite appropriate considering that the locomotive itself is the world's largest locomotive. It would make sense that it would need a ton of coal and water to just maintain it. For details, however, besides its sheer size, there is a load of separately applied and molded in details. Starting at the bottom, here you can see there is the classic Union Pacific Centipede style tender with those enormous tender wheels as well as separately applied details such as the Timken roller bearing caps and whatnot, brake rigging, and is accompanied by various separately applied details such as a builder's plate, separately applied ladder leading up to the tender deck, separately applied pipe work, and then on the tank itself, molded in rivet detailing, a molded in toolbox for the fire hose, another builder's plate up top, and then the beautiful white Union Pacific on the side. Very nice tender, especially for a very large locomotive. Looking at the back of the tender, starting at the bottom, working up to the top, as you can see at the bottom there is a nice separately applied coupler cut bar and is accompanied by a nice O-gauge coupler. In this case, this is the electro coupler for this model, and it could be thrown by either using Lionel's Legacy, TMCC, or Bluetooth command control systems. On the back panel itself, it is nicely detailed with two molded in grab irons as well as two polling knots for possible shunting with a polling feature. On the panel itself, it is nicely detailed with molded in rivet detailing, stat capacities, the number UP and 4000, two separately applied marker lights with separately applied conduits going to it, which these marker lights can be changed color from red to white when the locomotive is in operation, a central backup light which comes on when the locomotive is put into reverse, and then up top here is yet another marker light. In this case, this marker light comes on as a red when the locomotive is in operation and stays on as red, and it is accompanied by two curved handrails. On top of the tender, starting at the coal load, as you can see, it is quite nicely detailed, but if you take a closer look, you may notice it looks a little off. You may notice that it actually looks a little less dull than compared to a real coal load, and you may also notice there is a bit of a dent in it. While this isn't a problem and some kind of quality control issue from Lionel, this is actually because similar to the original VisionLine Big Boy, Lionel has continued the depleting coal load feature as first seen on those first VisionLine Big Boys. Now, if you do get a model that has an oil burner, that design of a rubber coal load being put in place of a real coal load is not going to be available for you. But for those who do have a coal load, in this case, what you will get is actually a rubber simulated coal load, and over time, as the locomotive's either standing still or even operating under different conditions, the coal load will slowly deplete, giving the simulation that the locomotive is actually burning coal actively. Over time, you may find yourself without any coal, so to speak, and will have to stop and refuel. So when you actually go and press the refueling button on your Legacy controller, the coal load will slowly raise up, simulating that coal is being refilled inside the tender with the associated sounds. A very nice feature that I'm quite happy Lionel has continued. Going down to the tender deck itself, here we have a molded in toolbox and then 3 water hatches. These water hatches are openable and separately applied, and under all 3 of them, they reveal the first 2 being empty, but the third one in the middle reveals the on and off switch for the coal load. So if you have to, for some reason, turn off the coal load feature, or you just find it a little too pesky, you could just simply turn it off manually. On the tender deck itself, it is nicely detailed with separately applied wood planking with molded-in rivets going along it, and also simulated wood grain, something that is quite nice. And then for other separately applied details, there are also 2 grab irons on either side of the tender deck. With both the locomotive and tender shown, let's go ahead and fire up this model and go over all the sound features.
Train 1 brakeman, UP 4000. We're showing 90 pounds on the rear of the train. Take out 20 for initial terminal brake test. That's a roger. 20 pound reduction given. Ready to deliver. Out. Roger, strong 20 pounds. Welcome to the train. Brakeman out.
With the locomotive fired up, let's now go over the sound features. First off, as you can see, the safety valves are automatically lifting, and the associated safety valve sounds are going off on the locomotive, and also the associated smoke. But let's now go over the less automatic features. First up, here is the smoking whistle. Next, here is the steam blowdown sound and also the associated smoke effect. Here is the water and coal fill-up sound. And if by any chance you would like to activate the safety valves on your own, you simply just press the aux 3 button located on your remote. And finally, here is a sampling of the crew and tower comm dialogue. As I said earlier, the locomotive is road number specific, and as a result, you'll hear engine number 4000 mentioned as the crew communicate.
Engine 4000 to the tower. Ready to roll. Can I pull? Please stand by. Out. Train orders. 14 seconds for 44 clearance, and we can take the main. My full. Out. Tower. This is engine 4000. Air is made. Brake test complete. Are we clear full? You are good to go. Out. Switchless says we've got 1 off and 3 on at the head end.
Alrighty, I got a long freight train hooked up behind the tender. We've been given the green signal, so let's go ahead and move this big boy on out.
Tower, this is engine 4000. We are done for the day. Heading to the register room to sign out. Out.
Well, that's about it for this product review, but before you go, let me go ahead and ask the two questions that I normally answer around this time of the video, and they are, what is the original MSRP price for one of these models, and also, what is my opinion on it? Well, to start off, the original MSRP price from the 2023 catalog is right at $2,900. In comparison, the original VisionLine Big Boys from 2014, 10 years ago, was right at $2,700. So over the 10 years that these locomotives have been out, they have seen a $200 increase, something that has been going on for the past year or so from Lionel and their most recent catalogs. Now, if you want to purchase one of these models, I would not hesitate, as this video is coming out a little later than I would have wanted it to have been, and as a result, the stock quantity for any of these models are going to be probably very limited. If you want this version of number 4000 specifically, you are going to have to go through Mr. Muffin's trains, and the quantity for them is probably either completely sold out, but I would definitely go and suggest checking them out just to double check and see if they have one of these lying around. But if you want any of the other big boy variations that Lionel has offered in their catalog, I would suggest visiting trainworld.com or even Charles Rowe. Both of those companies typically have some form of sale going on for most of their high-end products from Lionel, so I definitely would go and check them out. Now let's go to the second question, which was, what is my personal opinion on this model? Overall, I am a mixture of happiness and then also disappointment with this run of VisionLine locomotives. The reason being I have this mixed emotions with this model is not because of its initial appearance, nor its performance, but more importantly, the quality of the byproduct Lionel has produced. In this case, as I was continuously going over this locomotive to produce this video, I continuously found little errors in the quality control of this model, and many other people can attest to the same problems that I've found. For instance, one of the first problems people started noticing with these models when they opened them out of the box was that the gearboxes on these models, more specifically the mounting screws, were not even tightened down. Something that you would think a manufacturer that Lionel has hired to produce these high-end models would actually do and make sure were properly secured. More importantly, there were other details that were having problems, such as the brass bell. My local hobby shop sold one of these models to their customers, and unfortunately, when they opened it up out of the box, specifically to check the gearboxes and make sure all the mounting screws were tightened, they found the brass bell actually broken off and floating around in the box. As a result, they had to go and replace the bell in order for their customer to be satisfied. With this model in particular, I found the bell actually half screwed on, and as a result, I wasn't able to open the smoke box door completely. Thankfully, on this model in particular, that was an easy fix. Now, speaking about the smoke box, as I showed you earlier when I opened up the smoke box door, the detail plate inside, or the replica screens, were actually silver. On the original Big Boy from 10 years ago, that is meant to be painted black. Though you do not see that very often unless you open the smoke box door and leave it open all the time, that is still something you would not want to have on your model. And then finally, there were two other problems that I found while producing this product review video, and one of them I actually made a YouTube short about, and that is the smoke deflector detail on top of the main smokestacks. If you noticed in this video, I did not talk about those, as the reason being is because, as stated in that YouTube short, these smoke deflectors do not fit on the locomotive. So I went and took my original Big Boy smoke deflectors, compared the two, they're the same molding, and the old 10-year-old smoke deflector fits on the brand new VisionLine Big Boy, but not the one it came with in the box. So overall, though the locomotive itself is quite an enormous beautiful locomotive you would expect for nearly $3,000, and it also being a modern representation of a VisionLine locomotive, you would think Lionel would have improved the original 10-year design, but not go backwards. So overall, I would suggest this locomotive if it hadn't been for the quality control issues that Lionel is happening lately. As a result, I would much rather suggest waiting and being patient for a good deal, or purely just genuinely a actual VisionLine big boy from 2014 pop up on the secondhand market. Purchase it, because you'll have much better fun and more consistent quality with that model than compared to the newer VisionLine big boys. Well, that's it for this product review, but before you go, I just want to say thank you very much for watching this video and also watching it to the very end. It takes a long time for me to produce these high-quality product review videos for you all to enjoy, so I do dearly appreciate you watching it to the very end. If you would like to support my channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button, as that will automatically enroll you into the Trainmaster04 family and will also sign you up for automatic reminders and notifications of when new product review videos, YouTube shorts, or even comments are added to my YouTube channel. If you've also liked this type of video, please go ahead and click that like button, as that lets me know, as well as YouTube know, that the quality of my content is actually pretty darn good. But anyway, my name is Trainmaster04, and I'll be seeing you next time.
Dispatch, this is 3001. We are done for the day. Heading to the register room to sign out.